Hello students, I wanted to post one of these videos every week to cover the topic of the week, and I apologize I did not do this for week 1. And so this first video is going to actually cover chapter 1 and chapter 2, which is week 1 and week 2. And in the future I will try to post one video at a time, one chapter at a time, but sometimes I might do 2 or 3, maybe work a little ahead, hopefully. And so our, being remote and everything, can be a little bit challenging to engage in the learning process. And so hopefully the discussion post, the online weekly activities that I have on the Blackboard page are going to be helpful for you in engaging in the learning process. I also have the PowerPoints for each chapter posted up so that hopefully those will be helpful as well. And then finally some study guides that, again, hopefully will be helpful as you do our 3 exams this semester. But I think it's really important to have some experiential learning. And of course, this course does have an interview with a human service individual. And so that's great experience. And so just to be able to connect a little bit, I'm going to post these videos going over the chapters kind of briefly. And then if you all have any specific questions in the reading, if there's something that you want explored a little bit further, you want some examples of, or just some questions that you have as you're going through the readings and the material, please feel free to send them to me. Email me them, and then I will cover them in the weekly video. And so you can just send me an email that says, hey, can you address this question or this topic in the weekly video? And I will do my best to do so. And so hearing your feedback and figuring out what it is that you all want to get out of the semester would be great, because then I can tailor these videos directly to you. But for this first one, I'm just going to go over the chapters. And so we have our lovely textbook for the semester, Human Service Concepts and Interventions, or Intervention Strategies. And each week we're going to cover one of the chapters in here because there are 15 chapters. And so we have 3 exams this semester that are going to cover a third of the book. So the exam 1 is going to cover chapters 1 through 5, and then 6 through 10, and then 11 through 15. So again, starting with the first 2 chapters, chapter 1 is Human Services, A New Direction. And each chapter begins with a few questions to consider. And as you think about those questions, and then you read through the chapter, you're going to get some of the answers to them. But it's good to take a look at these questions initially so that you have a good understanding of where you stand when you start off. So do I have some idea? Have I ever thought about these questions? And maybe as you're reading the chapter, you're like, wow, I have some actual misinformation about these topics. And so it's good to have an idea of where you're starting, and then do the learning through the text, and then finish up with the summary. And so chapter 1's questions to consider is, what is the meaning of human services? And so that's really the crux of chapter 1, is sort of defining this sort of general term of human services. What recent circumstances have resulted in the growth of the field of human services? And this will be answered in the chapter, but I also challenge you to think about the recent events, right? Because, as a lot of people are saying, 2020 has been this really crazy, unique year, and a lot has happened. And so I imagine that the next edition of this textbook is going to have a lot of updates and adaptations based on this year alone, with the way that things are changing. And so think about some things that aren't covered in this textbook, that, these events and situations that really are going to have an impact in the coming years. What is meant by social policy? And so that will be defined in there. And there's this really important connection between social policy and human services. What are the differences between the concepts of integration and generic human services? And so it defines both of these things, and then we're going to get more into generic human services. And so the next question is, what are the 10 attributes of generic human services, which we'll cover today? And what is a human service worker? Excuse me. And so it's going to talk a little bit about the different types of workers. So getting into the chapter, it starts off with the definitions. Human services is a phrase that is often used to group activities that focus on helping people live better lives. And so throughout this program, you're going to be talking a lot about helpers and the helping relationship, because that can look very different through different human service careers. And then it also defines a human service worker as anyone who is trained or educated in helping activities. And so on page 3, it has box 1.1, which has some typical employment titles for human service workers. And so if you're thinking about the interview this semester and who you might want to interview, you can go to this list and identify some of the type of careers they might have. And so make sure you get to me before September 15th, the name and title or agency of the person that you're going to be interviewing, so that we make sure that they also fall into that category. On the next page, it talks about the current concepts of human services systems, and it has this wonderful little umbrella here. So this diagram kind of goes over the general topic here and then what falls underneath of it. And so like I said, human services really covers a broad range of jobs and departments. And so some of those include public welfare, corrections, crisis hotlines, vocational rehabilitation, Department of Mental Health, developmental disabilities, children and family services, and public health services. And so there's a lot under that. Again, like I said, with the questions, we get into the generic human services concept, which does list the 10 different characteristics that are listed under there, and talks about them in a little bit more detail. And so first is that human services are ideally delivered through an integrated service system. And so when you think about the different types of human service workers, they're often working in conjunction with one another, so that we can really do a little bit more of a holistic perspective and a community-based intervention. Human services places increasing importance on environment as a factor in problems of life adjustment, but doesn't ignore those psychological issues. And so it's really important to pay attention to them and make sure that psychological issues or mental health issues aren't negatively impacting individuals and families. But we need to look broader at that, because there are so many environmental factors that are impacting us and creating the difficulties or the barriers that we're facing. And they're not just all internal. And so it's very important to look at the environment and external factors as well. Human services focuses on problem solution rather than on treatment. And so when we think of treatment, we think of something a little bit more long-term for like psychological issues, psychiatric disorders and things like that. Whereas human services covers a little bit more of the problem solving aspect. So how can we get you connected to these different services or support networks? How can we help you to break down some of the barriers that are getting in your way and help support you as best these different agencies can? Human services has a major task of understanding the impacts of social institutions, social systems, and particularly cultural diversity on social problems. And so we don't live in a vacuum, right? And so we live within the socio-political climate of the time, and those are going to have an impact on us. And so specifically in our country right now, we're seeing a lot of the effects of the injustices and the inequities that have been perpetuated through the decades and centuries that this country has been in existence. And we can see the generational impacts of those just continuing, plus the continued trauma that's happening today. And so we need to be aware of all of that when we're working with individuals. Another major task for human services is identifying and using the experiences by which people grow, mature, or change. And so recognizing that we're not stagnant and that we are all capable of changing and growth, and there are different ways of going about that, and we should be aware of it in order to help individuals go through the process for themselves. Human service workers are identified by their competencies, their ability to do things rather than just their level of formal education or type of degree. And so there are many human services positions that don't require graduate degrees or advanced training or education. There are certainly some that do, but not all of them. And it doesn't mean that one discipline is more important than the other or more effective than the other. They just do different tasks. And so it's important to remember that. The focus for training human service workers is on learning skills in addition to knowledge. And so as you move through this program, you're gonna find that we're not just solely focused on focusing on memorizing facts and exams. While that is part of it, and we have to have a good knowledge base and understanding, it's more important to be able to practice those skills and put them into place when we need to. And so a lot of the courses that you're going to have are going to have some kind of experiential component or a role play or something like that. Like you're going to do interviews to practice interviewing skills. You're going to do mini sort of sessions that are going to focus on helping skills so that you get used to doing them. And so it's helpful from the beginning of the program to start getting used to using them, start practicing, because that's how you're going to get better and that's how you're going to improve. And we wouldn't want you to leave the program without having experience or at least some level of confidence in your ability to do those and to do those skills and practice those skills. The human services system demands that its techniques and approaches work. It is evidence-based. And so there is a lot of leaning on the research and looking at what do trends tell us, what works and what doesn't work. And we want to be as efficient as possible and do those techniques that really have been shown to work in different situations and with different individuals, which could be unique and different for every circumstance and every individual, but we want to make sure that it's evidence-based, and that means that it has been researched and shown to work in these situations. Human services is pragmatic and eclectic. It uses all the things that work in dealing with the client consumer problems, regardless of theoretical model. So at some point, you're going to have theories of helping, and you're going to talk about different theoretical models, and you're going to have classes in them and things like that. But really what it's about is not saying like, this is better than this, and we're going to differentiate these things, but recognizing that all of these can be helpful. And even if I work strictly from, this perspective, that I can have a good idea of these other theoretical orientations that are also helpful in different situations and tailor it specifically to the individuals that I'm trying to help. And then the final one is that human services is efficient. And so again, we want to make sure that we're not spending a lot of resources and, resources as far as time, money, people power, all of that on something that could be dealt with more effectively or efficiently, because that is what's beneficial for clients, right? And beneficial for individuals, and also beneficial for us because we can then help more people. And we want to make sure that, we're not doing cookie cutter, but at the same time, if there are strategies that are effective and have been shown to work, those are going to be the ones that we go to first. And hopefully they're going to be the most efficient ones. So again, as I said in the beginning of the chapter, it gets into social policy and human services and how they work with each other, or at least hopefully are working with each other. And then the chapter ends with a nice little summary. The chapter have recommended readings at the end, which are really great. Sometimes they're textbooks, which you may or may not have access to. But in some cases, they're going to be articles that you can very easily get from the IRSC library. And so they might be things that are interesting for you to check out. In addition, it has internet sites. Those are also going to be really great for you to check out because they may have information that you're interested in, especially if you want to go into one of those fields, but also can help you to start creating a resource list where you start keeping track of all these resources that you can go back to when you need the information, or you can send clients to people that you're helping so that they have that information or connections. And then if you did get the My Helping Lab along with your textbook, there's an activity at the end of every chapter related to that you can choose to do as well. All right, getting into chapter 2. A history of helping. So some questions to consider for this chapter is, how long have people offered helping services? What is the history and how far back does it go? What did the view that disturbed people are sick affect helping services? And so helping services used, the medical model. So either someone is sick or they're well, and that had a big impact on helping services. And so we're going to look at that a little bit in ways that people were negatively affected by that. The next question is, what 3 viewpoints about human behavior have developed since the turn of the century? So looking at the more recent events. And then finally, what is the social welfare movement? I'm going to touch on that towards the end of the chapter. Chapters are pretty short, so you're not going to have a ton of reading each week. They're pretty easy reads. So the chapter starts off with a section called the dark past of helping, which I think is pretty appropriate for this section. It talks all the way back in ancient times and through the dark eras and or the dark ages and stuff about, you know, times when individuals that had mental health issues or, you know, individuals who were poor or, you know, struggling in some type of way were treated really poorly. They were abused, they were neglected, they were ignored, they were experimented upon. You know, religious organizations would sometimes try to do like harmful and dangerous exorcisms and torturous practices. In some cases, they were enslaved or killed. And so there's a pretty dark history of the helping profession. Obviously, that wasn't too helpful. But then we moved towards social welfare and towards more of a community approach and really learning how to help people and recognizing the importance of that and how different systems can come together to help people. The box 2.1 on page 19, it gets into the history of prejudice, and this is very brief. It does not get into a detailed history of prejudices, racism and xenophobia and all of that that has been present in our country since the origins, but it has a very short condensed list as sort of a side note. If you are interested in history and want to learn more about the history of this issue, a really amazing book. It is long, but I consider it to be an easy read because it was so engaging and it wasn't a difficult read, was Stamped from the Beginning by Dr. Ibram Kendi. And it really is quite a powerful book and quite educational because, you know, while I was aware of a lot of the things, I wasn't aware or as aware of the details. And if you don't want to read a book quite that long, there's a newer version of it called Stamped Remix. And it's another author who worked with Kendi to really shorten the book, make it more concise and lower the language used down to a like middle school, high school level, so that younger people could also read the book. But it also makes it a little bit more condensed if you don't want to read a long book. Anyway, side note, really great books. Check them out. Next, it gets into the beginning of the human services concept, which is about the 1940s is when this came into play, and things started really changing. And so the textbook goes into the history of that and a lot of the legislation and grassroots efforts and stuff that occurred during the 40s, 50s, 60s. And the 50s, later 50s and 60s is when the field human services really emerged and kind of took on something of its own. And it's basically it, kind of going over all of that. Has a summary at the end. Again, some recommended readings, internet sites, and if you have the My Helping Lab, you can engage in that activity. So again, you'll see another video from me for week 3 and moving forward. If you have any specific questions or want me to go over anything in more detail or with examples, please email me and let me know so that I can cover that in those videos. Because we're not having any live sessions, face-to-face sessions this semester, that would be a good way to help me to get your questions answered. If we can take care of it through email or even in these videos. So that is it for this week. Anything that comes up, let me know. And thank you for watching.